Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus Show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. 50 years ago, India tested a nuclear device. It became the sixth member of a nuclear club of 5 other countries which had tested nuclear devices. But it would be 24 years before India would test a weaponized form of that device. That's in Pokhran 2 in 1998. Cut to the present. A year from now, we will enter the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nuclear weapons are back in the news as global buzzwords today as the world order fractures, wars and insecurity have taken over, and the great powers are once again sharpening their arsenals. Russia has just announced it will begin tactical nuclear weapons drills, or nuclear weapons that can be used on the battlefield as opposed to strategic weapons that hit cities and large military targets. The US too has been signaling deployments of its ballistic missile submarines. But coming back to India, what are the key turning points driving India's quest for nuclear weapons? And do we need to test newer nuclear weapons today? Do we need more nuclear tests? Joining me to discuss this is Lt General PR Shankar, former DG Artillery, and my colleague Deepak Bhadana in the studio here. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus Show.
Thanks a lot for inviting me over, and it's an honor to be on News9.
Thank you very much, General Shankar. Yes, I want to start straight away by giving you what we believe are the 7 important milestones in India's path to becoming a nuclear weapon state. And we start by the 1962 India-China war. General Shankar, explain to us the significance of that and how China presented itself as a strategic threat to India 60 years ago.
Look, before 62, one must flag the 1950 to 53 Korean War.
Right.
Korean War, was a very significant event because it was China was threatened by USA with nuclear weapons which were to be fired across the river Yalu. That's a border between North Korea and China. That left a deep impression on China, right? And ever since then, China started developing its own nuclear capability.
Yes.
Immediately following that happened the 62 war, and where we lost badly.
Yes.
And 62 war made China into some kind of a permanent adversary or stroke enemy with us.
Right.
And then we've always had this thing that, look, we had to confront China at one point of time or the other, by one means or the other.
Right.
And that's played on our psyche quite a bit. And that's 62.
General Shankar, so 1962, but the interesting part of that war, Deepak, is, as usual, appreciate, that they were fought between 2 non-nuclear weapon states. At that time, neither China nor India had nuclear weapons. China had a very advanced nuclear weapons program, but India certainly had none. And cut to 1964, just 2 years after the border war, is when China tests nuclear weapons in Lopnor, and that took the world by surprise, and certainly India by shock. General Shankar, how did this shape our quest for nuclear weapons? Look, the Chinese nuclear test.
Yeah, a combination of 1962 and 1964 made us realize that our permanent adversary is not only going to be conventionally superior to us, but it has gone miles ahead with its nuclear capability.
Right.
And hence, I think there was a general consensus that we'll have to do something about it.
Right.
And you have to go back to the time 62 to 65. Between 62 and 65, our army was under reformation, our defense systems were under reformation.
Right.
A lot of effort went in, right, up to 65 ops, and in fact beyond that also. And that is when I think we started thinking nuclear.
Yes.
And when we said, okay, our civil nuclear program has to be now oriented towards defense.
Absolutely. And we chose the plutonium route. And then a few years later, General Shankar, we have 1967. We don't have an exact start date for the nuclear weapons program, but there have a number of accounts which suggest that it was during Mrs. Gandhi's tenure as Prime Minister that the first thoughts of a nuclear armed India began to emerge. And General Shankar, there's a very interesting member of Mrs. Gandhi's advisory board, Mr. P.N. Haksar, who's authored some of the most significant papers that call for India's role as a nuclear armed state. He actually makes those arguments why India needs to go nuclear. But tell us why 1967, the late 1960s, where was India strategically as a military power? We had just begun to recover from the 1962 war, 1965, and then you suddenly have the specter of a nuclear armed China on your borders.
Yeah, we always knew that, from 64 onwards, that China was a nuclear adversary.
Right.
And by 65, we had already 2 wars with, Pakistan, 48 and 65. And by 65, we were very clear that we were in a situation.
Right.
And very importantly, our national morale had turned over, especially after 65. And India was prepared to spend on its defense, programs, whatever, conventional and nuclear. And it'll be interesting to know that the period from 64 to, 63 after the war, about 66, 67, where some of the times when we've had the highest defense expenditure as a percentage of our GDP.
Right.
We even crossed 3.5%.
Yes.
Right. This was at a time when we were a poor country.
Right.
And, we used to go without meals on Monday, if I remember right. Okay. At that time, it was very clear to us that we had to defend ourselves. And that's why probably when we went in for a nuclear weapons program, that was just a start.
Right.
It was going to be a long, hard road ahead.
Yes.
We knew that Pakistan will be our immediate problem.
Yes.
Because having been suffered a defeat in 65, they would come back at us sooner than later.
Right, absolutely. And that's when the bomb program began. And Deepak, this is very interesting how the nascent Indian state in just about quarter of a century had already begun fighting so many wars. So you have 47, then you have 62, you have 65, and then finally you have 1971. But then just 3 years after that stunning victory of the 1971 war, General Shankar, we have the Pokhran 1 nuclear test, where India kind of announces its entry into the nuclear club. But of course, it's not a weapon. So explain to our viewers, what was the difference between the 1974 nuclear test and the 1998 nuclear tests?
Look, the 1974 nuclear test was a peaceful nuclear explosion.
Right.
What did it tell us? It told us that, or rather it told the world that we could enrich our uranium to weapon grade status. That's over 90% enrichment. We had the capability to do so. We had the capability to put together an atom bomb and use it. But it was not yet weaponized.
Right.
Right. What does 98 signify to you? 98 was a series of tests.
Yes.
Right? It also involved a 45 kT test and a sub kT test.
Right.
It was about 5 tests.
Right.
That gave you refinement in weaponization.
Yes.
Right? You have the capability now in 98 to nuclear tip your weapon systems with different kinds of warheads.
Right.
Right? I'll not which, but different kinds of warheads. But in between, there is this milestone, in the mid-80s.
Yes.
The milestone there was, in 74, we had established our nuclear credentials.
Right.
And then we said, now it's okay, fine, we have. How about weaponizing it?
Right.
Here comes ability to conversion from, a peaceful nuclear explosion, weaponization.
Right.
Around that time, we start the new the
IGMDP.
IGMDP.
Absolutely. But General Shankar, I want to go back one step to 1982, which was another factor that propelled our race towards becoming a nuclear weapons power, when we discovered to our shock and horror that Pakistan was close to getting a nuclear bomb, and from China. we know the date now because of a lot of research that's gone in. There have been revelations so far. But Deepak, this is again a very interesting point that till then we had no idea. We knew that Pakistan was going to become a nuclear weapon state. That famous quote by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto where he said that Pakistan would eat grass but it would get a nuclear weapon. And to which Mr. Haksar mentioned that if that was the case, then horses and cows would have nuclear weapons as well. But the fact is that there was a very active Chinese hand in getting Pakistan the plutonium, the enriched plutonium, the nuclear weapon designs, blueprints. And that now we know through the benefit of research and revelations that it was around 1982 that the Pakistan Air Force C-130s took off from China with the complete bomb-grade uranium, the cores, the blueprints, and the know-how to make the bomb. But tell us, General Shankar, how New Delhi reacted to this, the revelation of the fact that Pakistan had the bomb before us, a weaponized version of the bomb. And why did China transfer this tech to Pakistan?
Yeah. Well, look, let me talk a little about the Pakistan effort. Pakistan, after that famous saying that we'll eat grass but we'll have an atom bomb, this was just after the 65 war.
Yes.
Right? Bhutto went about it pretty smartly, if I may say. He started off that AQCON network where they could get a lot of designs for nuclear enrichment and nuclear processing.
Yes.
Nuclear material processing from Europe.
Right.
It was smuggled through that. Plus, they got the bomb design from China. And then they got the missile designs and blueprints from Korea.
Right.
And they got the money from the Islamic world.
Right.
If you remember the scope of the Islamic bomb.
Yes.
Put all this together, and then came the news that they were weaponizing their whole system.
Right.
The moment that happens, India is on the alert. Right?
Yes.
You know now, okay, you can't sit back on your haunches of
right.
You need to weaponize yourself.
Right. So we come to the 1983 milestone, which is when India sets off the IGMDP, starts off on the IGMDP, the Integrated Guided Missile Development Project for a series of strategic missiles being nuclear weapon enabled missiles. And that you have the Agni and then the Prithvi series, ballistic missiles. And General Shankar, you were part of both the Prithvi and the Agni missile programs. I don't know of many military men who've been on these missile programs. Tell us what the thinking was when we embarked on these projects in 1983. Was it always meant to be nuclear weapons carriers?
Look, when we embarked on the IGMDP in 82, 83, late 83, it came to form. And by 87, we had fired the first Prithvi missile.
Right.
And though the IGMDP had 5 missile systems,
yes.
that is Prithvi, Agni, Trishul,
yes.
Akash, and Nag.
Right.
The focus was on Prithvi and Agni.
The strategic missile carriers, yeah.
Strategic missile.
Yeah.
Prithvi was just a surface-to-surface missile, 150
yes.
kilometers at that time. Simple ballistic missile with some guidance. But the Agni was a strategic missile which gave us, we went in for re-entry technology.
Right.
With over 600 kilometers of range. Mind you, at those days, 600 kilometers was quite huge.
Right.
And our thinking was pretty clear, I think. While we were thinking of a conventional warhead in the normal things, what we knew by then, what Pakistan had, and I think we went at the back of the mind,
yes.
we were pretty clear that it should have a nuclear tip.
Absolutely.
Right? Especially for Agni.
Yes. Right? And then, so I want to fast forward, General Shankar. 15 years later, you have Pokhran 2, where India tests 5 nuclear devices over 2 days. Two are one is the boosted fission device, the other is the fission device, the other 3 are sub-kiloton weapons, which are battlefield tactical weapons, which are the subject of explainer you did recently, Deepak. 5 tests. We've hit 5 tests in 1998. 26 years later, General Shankar, I must ask you this. We've imposed a ban on more tests in 1998, the moratorium on further nuclear tests. Our scientists say that we have enough reason, we have enough data for different devices. Do you believe India needs to test again? Given the fact it's 25 years since we tested last, would there be a time when we would need to test a new series of warheads?
Okay. Look, 25 years back, we did those tests with the technology which was available there.
Right.
From a technological viewpoint, things have changed, right? And you can get better warheads which are more efficient, with better technologies.
Right.
From that point of view, you need to test.
Right.
But that does not alone constitute testing for nuclear weapons or nuclear tests. Or for that matter, miniature tests, right? What does, make force us to rethink is the fact that the world is nuclearizing in a different manner. You spoke of Russia going in for tactical nuclear warheads.
Yes.
But the fact is that Pakistan has put a tactical nuclear warhead on its Nasser missile long back, 3 years back. And that's just got about 60, 70 kilometers of range, whatever it is.
Right.
Okay. And next is China has, is enlarging and expanding its missile capacity, its nuclear capacity. It's under a tremendous nuclear expansion.
Right.
It started off a couple of years back with 350. Today it is said that it has about 500 nuclear warheads.
Right.
And by 2030, it has a plan to go to 1,000 nuclear warheads.
Absolutely.
Right. So does this places us at a disadvantage? We'll have to think over it.
Right.
The third factor is that, you just designed and, demonstrated MIRV capability.
Yes.
Indigenous.
Right.
Right. And they're going to be small warheads, or rather, logically. So with all these three things put together, forces us to rethink our whole story of test ban.
Yes.
It's the time has come for us to go tactical, or not, is something which we have to debate. Is it the time to expand our nuclear capacity? Is also a point of debate. But you can do either only if you have better technology.
Right.
So from that point of view, I think it is imperative that we start thinking of doing tests. Okay. And probably if you have a very good stable government and things are this thing, we should go. There's another factor which I'd like to bring in.
Yes.
We are looking at the nuclear triangle here between India, Pakistan and China.
Absolutely.
This is one.
Yeah, it's the only nuclear triangle in the world, General Shankar, where one nuclear armed state is faced with two nuclear armed states, and they all three share a common boundary and contested boundaries. Yeah,
but there is another place which is coming up. There's another major nuclear flashpoint coming up.
There's North Korea, Russia, and China, but they are more or less in a.
If I may put in.
Yes.
It is at present North Korea, China, and of course Russia have nuclear weapons.
And they're fairly close to each other. They're aligned in a.
There is a debate on in Japan and South Korea to nuclearize.
Right.
And there is also US presence out there.
Yes.
Okay. So actually, what is coming out is the Far East is becoming a nuclear hexagon, that flashpoint.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Right.
It's going to be, in the next 3 to 4 years, you might well see this happening.
A nuclear hexagon in the Far East. The ring of fire is something that we used to call the Far East because of the volcanic activity. But as General Shankar mentioned, that could be, a string of nuclear weapon states, prospective potential nuclear weapon states. But Deepak, you've researched on tactical nuclear weapons and you've done a great explainer for us. You have a question for General Shankar on this.
So, General Shankar, I wanted to understand, we have some idea about Russia's tactical nuke capability. We know that Pakistan has had them, and every juncture they've repeated, threatened to use it against India. How do you see the other nuclear states and their approach to tactical nukes?
Look, you look at it from a historical point of view, USA always had tactical nuclear weapons. So did Britain.
Right.
So did France. Right? They've always had it from the Cold War days. Now we are looking at tactical nuclear weapons in our context. Definitely Pakistan has. China would have. They will never tell you. But we don't have. That I know for pretty sure. So
Right.
is there a case for us to having nuclear tactically? Is a point which we have to debate.
Right.
In the Far East, I don't see Japan, South Korea heading into
Yes.
the tactical nuclear play. But I see the nuclear proliferation and the missile proliferation in West Asia
Right.
is a problem.
Right.
With the kind of missile technology which the Houthis and the Hezbollah and Hamas
Yes.
have acquired, and Iran, one screwdriver away from being a nuclear weapons state, the transfer of technology of this critical nature to the non-state actors is also a screwdriver away.
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much, General Shankar. We are completely out of time here, but thanks as always for your clarity on nuclear weapons. I always remember the fact that you're someone who's designing some very cutting-edge technology for the armed forces, and but that's a subject for another discussion another day. But the fact that China and Pakistan forced India's nuclear tests is known, and thank you for taking us down that path from 1962 to present day. And the fact that you mentioned that India would need to test nuclear weapons at some point and would need to field tactical nuclear weapons, which a lot of other countries in the world are discussing and debating. But thank you very much again, General Shankar, for joining us, and Deepak, on this very burning topic, if I may say, on nuclear weapons and India's national security. Does India need to conduct fresh nuclear tests? Well, we asked that question to Dr. R. Chidambaram. He's one of only 3 Indian scientists to have played a key role in India's nuclear weapons program. The other 2 being Dr. Homi Bhabha and Dr. Raja Ramanna. Now watch our special show, First Person, featuring Dr. R. Chidambaram, only on the News9 Plus app. Download and watch.
I'm R. Chidambaram, and of course I retired as chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission. Then I was the principal scientific advisor to the Government of India. Now I'm back in BRC as honorary professor.
The foreign hand has been a recurring theme in India's politics for several decades. But recently, Prime Minister Modi said that foreign powers were making an attempt to interfere in India's elections. And the Russian spokesperson said yesterday that the United States is interfering in India's elections as well. Now, the US has just denied that statement. But there's an interesting 2016 study by Professor Dov Levin at the Carnegie Mellon University. Professor Levin studied 938 elections from 1946 to 2000. Part of the study, he found that both the United States and the Soviet Union and later Russia intervened in 117 of those 938 elections. The US intervened in 81 foreign elections, while the Soviet Union or Russia intervened in 36 foreign elections. That's about 1 in 9 elections. Majority of those interventions were through covert rather than overt actions. So clearly there's a precedent in the fact that great powers have intervened in elections, but are they still doing so in the light of all the new allegations that we've been hearing? Joining me to discuss this are Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Bhanuchandra Nagaraj, my colleague Aditya Raj Kaul in the studio at News9 Plus. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. Pramit, I want to start by asking you this. Prime Minister Modi brought up this very tried and tested old meme that we used to hear in the 70s and 80s, the foreign hand. Do you believe there's enough evidence to suggest that there are foreign forces that play to influence the Indian elections by whatever means? There's a toolkit debate that was we heard a couple of years back.
Traditionally in the past, I mean, the figures you cited, for example, are largely Cold War reference to Soviet and American intervention during the Cold War. That type of intervention, those type of interventions were often driven by simply money, blackmail, in some cases even running or supporting a specific political party.
Right.
And occasionally sort of public statements by a government in favor of someone else. Today, that probably will not work very effectively. One, people are a bit too sensitive about these things. Second, so you're normally now reduced to really either social media, online interventions in favor of a certain government. There's some evidence of finance is still useful, especially for smaller countries. And occasionally, yes, policy statements or endorsements. So those are the least effective because most people don't really care what other governments may tell them to do. In the case of India, of course, we have electronic voting machines. And I know we, Election Commission and the Indian security structure have in the past and continue to cross-check whether it is possible to hack EVMs and affect elections that way. And so far, there's been zero evidence that is feasible. So Prime Minister Modi has raised this, and there are definitely some foreign governments that would not like him to come to power or would like to intervene in this election. My overall sense would be the United States is not one of them. They have a very good relationship with Prime Minister Modi and have been generally happy with the direction of his policy. I know, and I have spoken with U.S. officials in Washington. They believe that he is easily one of the closest friends they've ever faced, sitting and ruling from Delhi. But Pakistan, potentially China, would be among the two countries that would immediately come to mind that would probably prefer Modi not to come to power. I have met Indian intelligence officers who've worked on China who said the Chinese are not all that happy, largely because they see Modi's economic successes as something that would be, in the long run, something that China would prefer not to see take place. Is that enough for them to intervene? My view would be no, not yet. But if there can be subtle ways, either, for example, online or finance, that would be feasible. The main reason why governments try not to do this directly, for fear of being caught, that the consequences of being caught would be almost at least 10 times more greater than the benefits. The costs would be 10 times more than the benefits of doing so, and would probably result in whoever they're trying to undermine winning the election rather than losing them.
Right, absolutely. And Aditya, when was the last time that you saw the US, Russia being pulled into a largely, Indian election debate where the Russians made that sensational allegation just yesterday saying that the US was interfering in Indian elections. What's your take on this?
Well, the Russian Foreign Ministry is an unlikely, person or a entity to come out with this particular statement. I heard Maria, the spokesperson of the Russian Foreign Ministry, day before yesterday, who said that, US was trying to interfere in internal affairs of India. Now, there are two aspects here. One is the kind of interference or the influence that is happening, be it from US, Europe, or any other part of the world, perhaps China and Pakistan more so. And second is the kind of impact it has had. Is the influence, is the interference really having an impact really? My inference or my understanding really is that there have been attempts. There have been attempts not during the elections particularly, but through the term last 10 years of Modi 1 and Modi 2, in which there have been attempts to influence a particular segment, a particular community, a particular area where a sentiment has been hurt or provoked to challenge Modi's government and the BJP in particular. There are several instances. You have heard the scandal of Cambridge Analytica
Yes,
that
of course.
happened.
I
That
was
was one of
coming
the
to that.
biggest scandals that happened,
2016,
not only in
yes.
India, but perhaps there were other countries that were
Right.
embroiled in it. Apart from that, you also have, of course, very recently, when the CAA protests happened,
Yes.
a lot of NGOs
Right.
came into the surface, and the Modi government, particularly the Ministry of Home Affairs,
Yes.
acted hard against them.
Right.
There were instances where these NGOs were trying to provoke,
Yes.
fund, not just the CAA
Right.
protest, but also the farmers' protest that happened on the borders of Delhi.
Yes. In 2019.
Millions and
yes.
millions of dollars really coming in. There was, as you rightly pointed out, a toolkit scandal also
Yes.
happening, perhaps, some of the global activists involved in it. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there hasn't been a foreign hand.
Right.
But there have been attempts to strong arm India.
Yes.
The latest and the biggest example is the Hardeep Singh Nijjar
Yes.
matter that is underway. And there is the foreign press, the Guardian, New York Times and others. It almost feels like printing handouts from the CIA or the Five Eyes intelligence.
Right.
Whether this will benefit Modi or go against him is for anybody to judge. But certainly there have been attempts at
Right.
foreign interference. More so by Pakistan and China, certainly.
Yes.
But certainly to strong arm India, the rising India, an India that cannot certainly be ignored in this new international order, perhaps yes.
Right. China and Pakistan, the obvious countries that wouldn't want Prime Minister Modi to return to power, as Pramit also mentioned, Aditya. But Bhanuchandar, what's your sense on the foreign hand making a return to Indian political discourse, becoming a global buzzword now with Russians and the Americans now jumping in point and counterpoint? What's your take on this? Are foreign countries actually involved, as Aditya mentions, Five Eyes countries? Probably one we know for sure wouldn't want Prime Minister Modi to come back. But what's your take on the other four?
You see, international relations operates in a jungle, right? Every student of the subject is taught that
Yes.
there are actors in a nation state that act in immoral ways and get away with it.
Yes.
There will be election interferences, and they will brazenly deny the fact that they are interfering as well. And interference happens through multiple ways, like Aditya was saying, through non-profits, especially during the CAA protest, what we saw, through media arms.
Right.
The Guardian actually endorsed Rahul Gandhi, and Washington Post did a job with the Panoon and the Nijjar affairs.
Right.
And if you remember, in 2019, The Economist endorsed Rahul Gandhi as well. But what has hurt the most, the relations the most, is the fact that USCIRF, which is a federal agency,
Yes.
talking about religious freedom in India, that is unacceptable. That is where I think somebody should draw the line. I think our foreign policy mandarins have handled it very well. There are cool heads that are prevailing, but
Right.
Sandeep, we should expect this more. We are
Right.
becoming a superpower. We are going to be the third largest economy soon.
Yes.
Nobody is going to roll out the red carpet for us.
Right.
We should actually develop our own counter instruments in terms of social media security, our own social media impact,
Yes.
and other instruments. In fact, we should have a media behemoth like a BBC or France 24, so on. Maybe
Right.
News9 could become one of that as well, I guess.
Right, yeah, we'll have to look at that. But Pramit, this point that Bhanuchandar mentioned, the fact that there's a certain, debate in the Western world, especially about, India's rise, kind of government of India policies. Do you see this as part of a conspiracy, or is it just the fact that we need to grow a thicker skin to handle this kind of criticism, especially given the fact that we're going to be the third largest economy in the world in a couple of years' time?
So a couple of points you made here. First, you have to differentiate between what is sponsored by governments and what is
Yes.
sponsored by, if you wish, non-state players. And in this case, the non-state players are often NGOs and foundations.
Right.
What's interesting in the modern world is that foundations, some of them anyway,
Yes.
are almost as powerful as small governments or medium-sized governments are
Right.
in terms of resources they bring to play. A Gates Foundation, a Soros Foundation. Some of these now have $50 to $100 billion to play around with.
Right.
And they will push the agendas of the people who give the money, who are providing the money.
Right.
So, for example, and then media, of course, is a complex game of people who agencies and that are independent, that work
Right.
with government, and do whatever they feel like. So the Guardian is a left newspaper, so
Yes.
it'll automatically be violently critical of Modi, whatever it may think of India. But it can hardly be considered an arm or close to the British government because they hate Rishi Sunak even more than they hate Modi, and are wildly critical of Sunak and desperately hoping that he'll lose the next election. So these are these non-state players, or the things are a more complex way of reading it. And one of the results, I think, of the fragmentation of both media, the rise of giant foundations with money that are comparable to like giant corporations, for example, makes it harder to distinguish who exactly is behind what.
Yes.
But I think broadly, yes, Modi is seen, let's put it this way, there is a large cluster of left liberal institutions in the West, the coastal elites of America, if you wish, and urban elites in parts of Europe, who have conflated Modi's rise and his policies with the right-wing leaders they do not like at home, whether it's Trump or Sunak and so on and so forth, even though in many ways they're very different. These different people and the agencies involved are not at all the same. And so therefore attack Modi on the basis that he's part of the same thing that Trump is. So when I've asked, in fact, when I've argued with people from these organizations and so on, I said, look, Modi is one of the strongest supporters of green transition and green energy in the world. He has passed a transgender rights bill. He has supported decriminalization of homosexuality in this country. So then you come in and say he's like Trump. He's not at all like Trump. He's increased abortion rights in this country. So how does he fit in with your right-wing thing? And they often don't even know. They're like, oh, we had no idea. Because they have biased themselves. They've made them
straitjacketed in their thinking.
Exactly like a right-wing Republican of a certain variety.
Right, a cookie-cutter definition of a right-wing Republican thing. But, Aditya, interesting points they made there by Pramit, the fact that there are actually large foundations out there that are actually funding groups, protests, NGOs, and that possibly also explains the reason why the Modi government has cracked down on NGOs, especially NGO funding. But that's a separate debate for another day. But what's your point on this, the fact that what Pramit mentioned, NGOs, foundations becoming as powerful as governments. How do you identify when a government is behind a certain act, or whether it's an NGO or a foundation?
No, I quite agree with him, and I absolutely concur when he says that there is a certain leftist lobby, particularly in the media, the intelligentsia, and of course in many cases there is the deep state that acts, and of course we'll have to be vigilant in both ways. And in many of these protests, particularly the Sikh separatist protests and the CAA, we've had several NGOs, and that's why the toolkit really came in. But of course, I think the foreign ministry and of course India's deep state would be able to easily identify the kind of people who are involved and where the deep state is certainly acting in a certain way to strong arm India. As I said, the current phase, particularly immediately after the G20 success that India had last year, we've had the Khalistani issue really rising, even though there isn't much Khalistani presence or resonance in the Indian state of Punjab in the last 3 decades. So this is a way to strong arm and perhaps provoke a new kind of a violence in India, and perhaps make India and the Indian government believe in certain kinds of foreign notions where they do not want to see India's rise, particularly economically, apart from a certain level.
Right, absolutely. Interesting points. Thank you very much, Aditya, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Bhanu Chandar, for joining us this evening on this debate on the foreign hand in India's 2024 elections. A very unlikely bunch of statements coming out there from the Russian spokesperson, and of course denied by the US, and of course Prime Minister Modi alleging that there's a foreign hand at play in India's elections.